Hello everyone, welcome to my video on GitHub. In this video, I'll be showing you how to use GitHub. It's a complete beginner's guide. I'll be showing you how to use it and how to get started and integrate it with one of your existing or new projects. So what is GitHub? Now, to understand GitHub, you need to understand what Git is, and if you don't have any idea about what it is, I'll link one of my old videos which explains it in detail. So Git and GitHub are different. Both of them should not be confused. Now, Git is a version control system. It is used to manage versions or history of your projects. It helps you create a timeline and manage your file changes over a period of time. Now, when you want to collaborate with multiple people, you want to work across multiple devices, you need one central repository, a remote repository where everyone can connect to. They can manage, they can push the changes and pull the changes from that remote repository, which everyone has access to. So what you do is you start by initializing a Git repository in your local system. Now this is your local repository. You create files, you manage files, you edit them. And then what you do is you create a remote repository on GitHub. So it's basically giving you an ability to host them for you. And we can do this completely free of charge. So once you do this, your repository can be uploaded or pushed to this remote repository on GitHub. And anyone else who wants to collaborate with you can access and download the files or pull the files from that repository. Now again, you have all the same features or changes that you can do with the local Git repository. So someone else who has pulled the changes or pulled the latest update from the remote repository can work on the changes, work on a new branch, they can merge it. And once they've done the changes, once they're done for the day, what they can do is they can push their changes back to the remote repository. And whenever the remote repository changes, any files changes on the remote repository, you can always pull it back from that. So this concept of pulling and pushing from the remote repository and synchronizing changes is what I'll be showing you in this tutorial. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder on my desktop. I'm going to call this test as usual. Open this up. With my Finder, if you're on Windows, whatever file manager you're using, same thing goes for Linux. I'm also going to open this up with my terminal, or basically opening the terminal at this location. And what I'm going to do is create a few files so that I can actually work with them. So I'm going to create a HTML file. I'm going to create a simple txt text file and maybe a CSS file. So I have 3 files created in my folder. Now the first thing I'm going to do is initialize or create a Git repository here. So I do this with git init, and the Git repository has been created. So a few hidden files and folders have been created, which helps track changes and manage the version of our files and the history of our files, so that we can revert back to previous commits in the future if we need to. So to view, if you want to view these hidden files, you could type ls or specifically ls flag a, and you should be able to see these, but it's not advised to mess with these files. So I'm just going to clear the output, and now that our Git repository has been created, our local Git repository, the first thing I'm going to do is just run git status to see what it says. So we see no commits yet, but we have untracked files. So the first thing I'm going to do is add all of the files with git add and commit these files with the m flag, and then specify my commit message. This is going to be initial commit. So my files have been committed. This is my first commit. So I'm going to clear this. Now once we're done with this, my next goal is to create my GitHub repository, my remote repository. So I'm going to go over to the browser and I'm going to go over to github.com. So create a GitHub account. It's completely free to do. So once you've created a new GitHub account, I'm going to go over and create a new repository. So it might look a little different. So navigate to the particular place and create a new repository. So you should be able to see the owner, your account name, and then you have to specify a name of a repository. So I'm just going to call this test. So the thing is, I'm creating my GitHub repository from the browser. There are also command line tools so that you can create it from the command line, but I feel doing it from the browser is just much easier. So I specify the repository's name and then an optional description, which I'm going to leave blank. Then you can choose to make it public or private. So if it's private, it's just you. If it's public, then it's available to anyone on the internet. So anyone could do a Google search or go to the specific URL and they can see your code and they could download the code. So I'm going to just leave this private. The next thing is initialize your repository with. So this adds a few optional files for you. So a readme file is basically a description or a file that introduces your code to the other people who looking at your code for the first time. So this readme file is written in a markdown syntax. So if you don't know markdown syntax, it's okay. I'll show you a few of the basics. So it's a very good idea of having a readme file, especially if it's a public project which you expect other people will be working on. So if they're coming and opening up this project for the first time, a readme file is going to help them get started with it soon. A Git Ignore file includes a list of files or folders that you don't want to track. So if you have any files which are being built automatically, and if you don't want to add them to your Git repository, you have to add Git Ignore file. And then these are licenses that you could add optionally. So we can leave this all blank and we can add these manually later. So I'm going to go ahead and create the repository. So once we've done this, it takes us to this page and now it's currently blank. Under our code tab, we can't see anything because we've not actually added any of our code. So that's the next thing we have to do. The code that we have in our local Git repository, we want to push it to our private remote repository. So there are a few commands that are shown over here. Now you can see there are two options we can use, HTTPS or SSH. So I'm going to choose HTTP here because SSH requires some prior configuration that you have to do. So I'm just going to stick with HTTPS. And now we can see a few options. So I'm going to go over here where you say or push an existing repository from a command line because we already have a repository created and all we need to do is push it. This option we can use if we have a new repository which has to be created. So the first command you see is git remote add origin and then the location of our remote repository. So what this does is adds a remote to our local Git repository. So I'm just going to copy this, go over to the terminal, and then I'm going to paste this. So the explanation of this is using the git command, there's a git remote command which adds a remote. So basically we're adding a remote, so git remote add, and the name of the remote is origin. So we can definitely specify a different name, but by default it's called origin. And then the remote, what we do is we specify a URL or the location to our remote repository. So this helps the repository know every time we say git push, this is where we want to push it to. We could say git push origin, but that's the default, so that's not necessary. So just copy the first line and hit enter. This adds our remote which is called origin. Now the second thing we're going to do is specify the name of the branch, git branch flag m main. So do this again, and then what we're going to do is make our push. So go back and paste this. So it says git push flag u. The flag u is for the origin to specify the remote. So the name of the remote is origin and the name of the branch is main. So we say git push flag u origin main, and this pushes all our code to our remote repository which is located at this location, and we did this by specifying our remote which is called origin. So once it's done, hit enter. So now this is done. Now all we have to do is come back and refresh this page, and we should be able to see our code. So I can see my text file, my HTML file, and my CSS file. So we have successfully created our local repository, created our remote repository, and pushed all our files from the local repository to the remote repository. So that's done. Now we worked with the git push command, so all we need to do is say git push, or you could definitely do it as before. We could say git push flag u origin main, but as I said before, this is the default, so all you have to do is say git push, and this should take care of everything for you. Now it says everything up to date, so it prevented us from pushing our code. Now the second thing is git pull. So if I was collaborating on this project with someone else and they made a change, if from their system they had pushed their code to the remote repository, then this would have been changed. So I want to get the latest changes so that I can work with it on my system. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say git pull. So this is going to check the remote repository. Has anyone made any changes? Have I made any changes, or if someone else made any changes? And if they have, it's going to pull the changes from the remote repository to the local repository. So I have the latest changes on my system. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the HTML file. I have an option to edit this file over here. So I'm just going to add HTML tag. And what I'm going to do is graphically in my browser I can specify the name of my commit, the message for my commit. I'm just going to say update index.html, commit directly to the main branch, and commit the changes. So I've made my change. I'm going back to the code tab, so I can see all my commits and what is the latest commit. Now so last time I said git pull, it said already up to date. I'm going to say git pull one last time. So it's going to check, and if there's any changes, which there were, it's going to bring back all the changes and it's going to update my local repository. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say cat to print out the contents of the file of index.html. Now you can see my HTML tags, which wasn't there before when I actually created the file. I just updated it on the remote repository and I pulled back the changes and I got it. So this is how you synchronize changes using git pull and git push. Similarly, you can create a Readme file for your project. So I can create it on my local system by saying touch, and then I could say readme.md. So this is a markdown file. It uses markdown syntax. So I'm just going to do this on the website for now. I'm going to remove that file and go over and say add readme over here. So anytime you want to say heading, you use this hash. So one hash is for the main first heading. If you want the second heading, which is slightly smaller, 2 hashes, or the third heading with 3 hashes. And then any other text you want to type, just say type the text as is. If you want to type something italics, just put it inside asterisk, and you should be able to see a preview by hitting the preview tab. So that's pretty much it. And you could use different types of formats with this markdown file. And this is important, as I said before, when having a public file which a lot of people are going to be accessing, to introduce them and help them out with getting started with the project.